Most people who know me probably think that I'm a pretty moderate, even-keeled person. I often seek compromise or go with the flow or adjust to change pretty easily. But today you're going to see the other side of Hugh Taft-Morales, the wild-eyed radical extremist, because behind this gentle persona is an extremist for ethics, a diehard for dignity, and a radical for respect. I want to treat, in my life, every person, every single individual, as if they have inherent worth. Now, I'm exaggerating a bit for effect about my radicalism, because in dictionary definitions, fanaticism is called something that involves uncritical zeal, obsessive enthusiasm, and intolerance for contrary opinions. Those are things that I don't hope to express in my behavior. I don't want to fit what Winston Churchill described as a fanatic. He said, quote, "A fanatic is one who can't change his mind and won't change the subject." Do you know any? I'm also exaggerating how much my zeal is actually a part of the way I live my life, my behavior. I want to express this respect for the inherent worth of everybody on a more consistent and more radical basis. But I'm too comfortable in my life. I'm too scared to live as a fanatic. I'm also too affected by the opinions of other people, especially those that I love and that I'm close to. So in calling myself an extremist regarding inherent worth, I admit that I'm not always able to live up to that ideal. But I'm not exaggerating the scope, intellectually at least, of what I mean by everybody. I'm not exaggerating how wide a circle I want to draw around all people who I believe have inherent worth. Because the circle that I draw includes everybody. Sometimes people will say, "Well, you don't really mean everybody, Hugh, do you? You don't really think that everyone has worth? You're not including terrorists or Nazis or baby killers, are you?" Yes, I am. I am including everyone. Now, some people may say that seems irrational. I don't think it's contrary to reason. It may seem like an impossible standard to live up to. Probably. But I've already admitted that I'm too comfortable and too scared to live up to this ideal. But it's a commitment that's rooted deeply in my heart, something that I felt very strongly even before I heard about ethical humanism, and it's at the core of my ethical perspective today. And I want to try to explain why. So I hope you'll hear me. First, I'm going to try to explain what I mean by inherent worth, and then I'm going to see how far it extends. I'm going to touch briefly on how we talk about worth regarding the very young, the very old, people behind bars, and people who do very bad things. So that's my plan for today. Now, when I explain what I mean by inherent worth, I feel a bit like a broken record. In March of 2009, I gave a talk about inherent worth right here at the Philadelphia Society, and since then I've given talks on the same topic at Baltimore, Washington, Northern Virginia, New York, North Carolina, and every Sunday, the first Sunday of every month, I give an introduction to ethical humanism, upstairs tonight at 7, for example, and I talk about the importance of inherent worth. So you'll have to excuse me if this sounds familiar. But I talk about inherent worth because I had a personal aha moment once in graduate school, and it had to do with reading a philosopher named Josiah Royce, a 19th century idealist, and he talked about what he called a calm, clear insight that struck me as both obvious and profound. Royce simply said that every person in the world is a center of consciousness with as rich an experience as you, and thus deserving of profound respect. He wrote, "Pain is pain, joy is joy, everywhere, even as in thee." Pain is pain, joy and joy, in me, in you, for everybody. That's obvious. And that's profound. At least it strikes me that way. When you ponder it for a minute, just turn inside for a second. Think about yourself right now in this room Sunday morning. think about how you are a center of consciousness. Think about your memories, your hopes, your dreams, your pains and your joys, all of it. Think about the richness of it. Your first kiss, the birth of a baby, the death of a parent. Contemplate this vast universe of experience that constitutes your inner life. And now consider that that same expansive universe animates all human beings. It's true for everybody you know. They all have pain like you, joy like you, hurts, hopes, memories, mysteries, love. When I contemplate this obvious fact, it seems miraculous. Knowing that everybody in this room, at this moment, lives in a vibrant world of experience wakes me from my narcissistic slumber. I stop thinking just about myself. When I consider that in this basic respect, everybody that I walk next to today out of Rittenhouse Square is in this way just like me, I'm humbled. And when I realize that 7 billion people on this planet plus, right now, have this same experience, I find a sense of awe in that. Now, I'm overwhelmed also that what follows from this calm, clear insight, this profound realization, so many of the 7 billion people are struggling physically and emotionally. This ocean of need is scary. Felix Adler, who founded Ethical Culture, talked about it as being a source of our most profound spiritual pain. He says, all we have to do is really be honest with ourselves and we'll feel it. This is how he describes it. He says that this pain is, quote, due to the fate of those innumerable fellow beings who perish by the wayside, while mankind is slowly and awkwardly tries to achieve progress. I mean those many thousands who are dying unhelped in hospitals. I mean the victims of foul conditions that exist in the slums. We stand, as it were, on the shore and see multitudes of our fellow beings struggling in the water, stretching forth their arms, sinking, drowning, and we are powerless to assist them. I've read that passage over 100 times, and it doesn't cease to affect me. Each person in this multitude is of inherent worth, deserving of dignity and respect, and yes, they're living lives of suffering, not of dignity. I know it's true, but I want to shield myself from it because, as I said, I'm like you. Too limited, frail, scared, comfortable. Right? At the same time, a part of this has a more comforting corollary for me. Each one of us, each one of you, is also of infinite worth, deserving of respect and dignity. That comes as part of this package, that calm, clear insight. By acknowledging the worth of myself, I can better appreciate the worth of others. Ethical culture leader Howard Radis puts it this way. He says, the core of our moral life is pretty clear. It consists in a sense of integrity, of worth or self. It consists in the sense of integrity, of worth of self, and thereby a sense of worth of anyone else. It consists in a sense of love or acceptance of self, and thereby acceptance of everybody else. It consists in intelligence and understanding of self, and thereby understanding other people. Now, I grew up in New England, and I felt a weird tension in New England. On the one hand, I was told to have an adolescence of comfort and reassurance. I was encouraged by the media to have it my way, to be all I can be, to look out for number one. And yet at the same time, I was affected by some lingering Puritanism rooted in New England's past. The Puritanism lectured against being overly concerned about myself. Sacrifice was central to ethics. Altruism was considered the most moral act. Hard work was praised not because it could get things done, but because it was hard and demanding, and thus good for the soul. Despite my generally secular upbringing, I saw enough crucifixes to wonder why this poor victim of cruel torture was worthy of imitation. But that was the tension that I felt. Go for yourself, but don't. So I'm intrigued by this tension between self-interest and self-sacrifice. And while it still infects my personality a bit, I find that this idolization of sacrifice itself is misguided. Because I think, isn't being good about being good to others, but also about being good to yourself? Aren't we more effective at helping others if we're bolstered by healthy self-esteem? When on the shores with our eyes wide open, seeing our fellow beings sinking and drowning, can't I do more good without a sense of self-loathing? Can't we love others and ourselves? Maybe we won't be so helpless at that point. That's what ethical humanism is all about. While Felix Adler, you can see his portrait going up the stairs, he seems a little dour and puritanic, and he was, but he did want everybody to flourish. Everyone. He wanted to bring out the best in others and in himself. Goodness includes self-respect. He said, "May the humanity that is within every human being be held more and more precious, and be regarded with ever-deepening reverence. The vice that underlines all vice is that we are held cheap by others, but far worse, that in our inmost soul we think cheaply of ourselves." One reason we think cheaply about ourselves is we let others define us cheaply. This happens all the time. Adler talks about the difference between the worth paradigm and the value paradigm. How many people have heard me talk about that here? Wow, I'm not a broken record. Good, good. Or you're just not remembering. The value paradigm dominates our culture. This is how it works. People are judged in terms of their value as it affects the marketplace. That's how it works. The value of a carpenter is determined by how much we're willing to pay them to do their work. Their value is subjectively determined relative to other people. Worth, however, is not relative to other people. It's not determined by the marketplace. It is inherent. It's part of our nature, wrapped up in our very identity. The worth paradigm means that we're not tossed to and fro on the waves of public opinion. Worth is unconditional. It's related to self-esteem. That term is often maligned as meaning sort of fluffy, self-congratulatory praise, undeserved. And some criticize labeling out self-esteem when it's not earned. They say self-esteem should be something you earn, the old-fashioned way. Now, I'll admit that there's something unattractive I feel about lavishing way too much praise when it's not earned. For example, when somebody comes and tells me, they want to show me how well they play violin, and after only 3 lessons, and I say, "Oh, that's really good," when it hurts my ears, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the very core of humanness. I think demanding people earn that basic respect is destructive. The Washington Ethical Society website, that's where I started my journey in ethical culture, says it this way. It says, "When self-esteem is conditional on success, we repeatedly prove ourselves over and over to people to keep it from slipping away." How many of you do that? How many of you get caught in that? Inevitably, self-esteem, founded on value rather than inherent worth, rises and falls with the circumstances. The website continues, "Everyone suffers in times of illness, misfortune, social and economic downturns, frustrations and failures. We need strong self-esteem when we face the risk of an ambitious challenge or when experiencing loss. But at times like that, value-based self-esteem is most in doubt." Get it? You need self-esteem the most when you're down, but when you're down, you blame yourself for it. You're the cause of the failure. It continues, "Even the natural process of learning by trial and error is undermined when we experience mistakes as lost self-esteem. Faith in human worth means seeing yourself as deserving of respect, as a good creative being, regardless of the circumstances." That was their website. Now, this approach to self-worth flows from the Enlightenment, it flows from the writing of Immanuel Kant. I'm going to briefly touch on that. Kant talks about the fact that a human being should be treated as an end in itself, never as a means. In other words, a human being is not a tool to be used by any of us for our own purposes and then tossed away when we're done. People are worthy of respect, Kant says, simply for being rational, sentient people. Inherent worth shines from the ideals of Thomas Jefferson. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, and that they're endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, the term unalienable is very important in that phrase for me. It means that these rights are intrinsic to the person, part of their essence. They can't be stripped away. They can be violated, but they cannot be taken away. They can't be made alien to them. They are unalienable. The same is true with inherent worth. Joe Schumann, ethical culture leader, says it this way. He said, Kant proclaimed that everything in the world either has a value or a dignity. The value of an object is based on the need that it fulfills for someone and the use to which we can put it. Jill will pay $1 for a bottle of Poland spring water, but Jack, who is dying of thirst in the desert, will spend his entire fortune of $10 million for the same bottle of water because it's the only thing that stands between his survival and demise. The value of an object is again based on what we can make use of. And that value rises and falls according to the needs of the evaluator, as does the price of the object. The price is relative to the interests of the evaluator. For Kant, value and price are synonymous. The price of the bottle of water, $1 or 10 million. Joe continues. But Kant asks us to consider, what's the price of Jack and Jill? How much would we pay for them? And Kant tells us that when it comes to human beings, and human beings alone, they have no price. They are beyond price. Unlike any other thing in the universe that we use and exploit for our own gain and our own interests, human beings are off the scale of cost-benefit calculation. They have no market value. They are, Kant tells us, priceless. Things possess a value, but human beings possess, by contrast, what Kant calls dignity. Now, maybe dignity is a more down-to-earth term than inherent worth. I think some people get dignity, because we all know what it's like to have our dignity violated, don't we? We know what it's like to be humiliated, insulted, or shamed in public. When our dignity is violated, we feel wounded to our core. Ethical humanism asks that we stop such violations of human dignity. Adler puts it this way. The conception of worth and dignity that each person is an end per se, not a mere abstraction. Our interest is not merely academic. Every outcry against the oppression of some people by other people, or against what is morally hideous, is the affirmation of the principle that a human being as such is not to be violated. A human being is not to be handled as a tool, but to be respected and revered. So how well do we respect and revere each other? How well do we respect those in particular that don't have a lot of value on the marketplace? The very young or the very old? Let's start with that. In exploring the value of the very young, we can start with Ben Franklin's rhetorical question. He said, what good is a newborn baby? Somebody asked him what good is his ideas in science. What's good is his idea of finding electricity. He said, well, what's good? What good is what use is a newborn baby? Because in some ways, in reality, newborn babies don't have any real use. Rarely any of us would use them as a tool to our own self-advancement. But children are stolen every day. International Labor Organization, looking at child trafficking, says that over 1 million children annually are kidnapped and sold on the black market. Now, obviously, that violates the most basic assumption of human worth. It violates UN protocols and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. The cash value in those cases have eclipsed the worth of the child. And we all know in our gut how deeply that violates worth. Even children who have value, however, who can be sold on the black market, are perhaps one step up of children who have no value at all, and their worth is totally ignored. What I mean by that is that there are some children that aren't even valuable enough to be exploited in this world. Save the Children says, and this is a statistic that blew me away, I've got to double check it, but I checked it twice. 1 million babies every year die the day they are born. 1 million babies a year die the day they are born because they have no value, let alone worth. We ooh and ah at these little bundles of joy, but our society ignores so many. Even in our own society, we ignore pre- and postnatal health for the children. We ignore extended maternity leave so the parents can bond with their children. Politics is so focused on the next election cycle that we don't do anything about economic and environmental policies that are going to assure these children a future. So clearly we're not doing very well. Can't we agree that they have worth regardless of not having value in the marketplace? Isn't there something intrinsically sacred about these little creatures despite their helplessness and irrelevance to the marketplace? The marketplace seems to spend most of its attention focusing on people who are sort of in middle age, in the prime of our lives, because that's when your skills are most honed, but your salary is not too high, right? I mean, you can ask anybody in the marketplace here looking for a job, the older you get, the less you are valued. There's rampant age discrimination. When we grow older, we tend to become more dispensable and invisible in our society. We have a youth is everything culture that undervalues experience. And should age also bring the need for greater care of certain infirmities, respect for inherent worth is challenged. I recently listened to a Radio Times program that Betsy told me about called Attitudes on Aging. And the guests all agreed that today older people are more active than they've ever been. But should they become infirmed at all, they are shunted off to the sidelines quickly, often warehoused in nursing homes. The program addressed the fact that the value of the elderly is challenged by stereotypes about what it means to grow old. Often the elderly are patronized. They're seen as nice, but incompetent. We only see this ignoring of the skills and wisdom that are acquired over a lifetime. Only the negatives are focused on. And in the program, actually, there was an example of this that was fascinating. There was a medical school exercise that was described that was supposed to help the students understand what it's like to be old. Professor Alansky from the School of Public Health at the University of Illinois described what's called aged simulation sets. And these aged simulation sets were a collection of devices that came in a big duffel bag that you strap onto your body to simulate what it's like to grow old. So they have braces to keep you from bending over, weights on your legs, goggles for your eyes, earplugs that muffle the sound, and so on. You can go online and get the LM060 for only $1,583, $1,583. But these are all through all these medical schools. And they're advertised as demonstrating, quote, the inconveniences felt by the aged due to musculoskeletal, visual, and auditory aging. Now, I appreciate how such an experience might help develop empathy for doctors and nurses and elder caretakers. But Alansky criticized the fact that he thinks that that's the dominant way we approach aging, as a restriction, as a loss, or as a lack. And it doesn't do justice to all that life experience offers the older people in our society. A couple of years ago, Jared Diamond, who wrote Guns, Germs, and Steels, was talking about attitudes about aging and all around the world. And he said that there's a great variety of them, obviously. He said that many societies are very effective at making sure they take advantage of the skills and benefits that the older members of their society have. They involve them in governance or food gathering or child care or guardians of oral tradition. But some societies, he noticed, did just the opposite. They would often abandon or even kill older people that lost their quote-unquote market value, or they were blind to their market value. Now, in the United States, Diamond said that we're often impatient and inconsiderate toward older citizens when they become less capable of what we call productive work. We're not very imaginative, Diamond said, in figuring out how to care for everybody. He cited actually the cult of youth and also the Protestant work ethic that judges you based on how productive you are in society. I mean, what's that first conversation starter you get at cocktail parties? What do you do? Right? I live. I love. That's not enough. But this conversation about the value of older people doesn't even address the real issue that I'm trying to focus on today, which is the inherent worth, which is independent of the ability of anybody to do quote-unquote productive work in the marketplace. Whether or not an older person offers obvious value added, they still need to be treated with the inherent worth that we know in our heart they are owed. Dignity is always a part of every human life. Now, most of the time I speak before groups like this, progressive, forward thinkers, carefully ethical thinkers, most people agree on what I've said so far. I get more resistance when I talk about people who are behind bars. Now, generally, most people will say, I accept the inherent worth of people at both ends of the life spectrum, whether they're in nurseries or nursing homes. But the resistance I feel even in these circles for people who are behind bars really brings me to think of Dostoevsky's phrase. In The House of the Dead, he said, quote, "The degree of a civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons." We have certain Calvinist strains in our culture in America designed to dehumanize, to depersonalize, and to objectify. We carry with us a lot of assumptions about sin and guilt and retribution. Add to that a profit motive and some unhealthy doses of classism and racism, and you end up with the travesty that is our prison system today. Our prison industrial complex does what it does primarily because it's out of sight, out of mind for most people. We have to get it into plain sight. I've asked this before. How many have read Michelle Alexander's New Jim Crow? How many of those people have the book? If you haven't read it, go ask somebody for the book. Get it in your library. It's an important book, part of many. There are many. It's not easy to learn about this bitter fruit that grows in our national tree, and it's a national tree that has brought us great and noble harvests. Obviously, it can take centuries to live up to our lofty ideals. I mean, just look at slavery and racist discrimination. It takes centuries to deal with it. But I believe we can bring out the best ideals from our history. So in combating the evil of criminal justice, we can draw, I believe, on Kantian values of dignity and respect. We can live up to the values that our country gave birth to. We can use ethical humanism's values to change the system. But again, I hear people say, with a loaded emphasis on the first two syllables, Hugh, you don't mean everyone, do you? Most people will agree that the inherent worth of the thousands of young people that are thrown into prison for nonviolent offenses in this country, in this city, that worth should be valued. But people will say, Hugh, you can't really mean the really hardened criminals, can you? You don't include those who burn and pillage and rape, do you? I do. I don't do it out of the naive hope that mercy is going to somehow bring out the better in them. I know there are people that need to be locked up for a very, very long time. But I believe that honoring the worth of people who have done nothing to honor that worth is simply the right thing to do. I think it brings out the best in all of us, in me and in you. Again, my mentor, Joe Schumann, said, we can inject into our criminal law what we would call civilizing standards, which preclude cruelty or revenge. He says, we do not rape the rapist. We do not burn down the house of the arsonist. We do not torture the torturer. Rather, we search for some civilizing standard by which to treat malefactors, which in the process of assessing punishment keeps us civilized as well. So, in hoping to live a civilized life, one that radically defends the worth of every person, I already have said that I don't live up to that ideal as well as I want to. I need to do better. I want to do better. And I admit that it's been a lot easier for me, too, than it has been for other people. I've been spared the intense pain caused by other people. For those who are not so lucky, for those who have gone through unimaginable physical or emotional suffering at the hands of malicious, sick individuals, I understand that they may see things differently. They may not now or ever be able to see the worth in the people who did these horrible, cruel, and malicious acts. And I think I might feel the same if I were in your shoes. But I hope not. I hope I show the courage shown by thousands of victims of violence who turn away from the dark, from the anger, from the hate. Read a story about Rebecca DeMuro, 12-year-old daughter, Andrea, was raped and strangled about a decade ago. The devastating rage and hate that she felt made her want to find the killer and, quote, blow his brains out. But she was able to turn away from that, as did everybody who contributed to something called the Forgiveness Project, which is an online resource for people suffering from violence. Another group similarly, called Murder Victim Families for Reconciliation, who reject the ethos of retribution infecting our capital punishment system. Now, I'm not going to share more of Rebecca's story about that. You can read it online. You know what I'm trying to say. We're all human. We all will react to intense suffering in different ways, but I hope we create a culture that encourages humanization of everyone, even those who do terrible things. There's no single way to maintain faith in the inherent worth of everybody. I've talked about this in the past. I like Thich Nhat Hanh's approach. He suggests that we develop sort of a centered meditation. I invite you to try this when you go home today. He says, breathe slowly and deep, settle yourself, and then bring to mind a person who is troubling you, who has hurt you, who you might even hate. Don't deny the hate, just breathe through it. He suggests that you then imagine that person as a newborn infant. Imagine their little hands and feet, the sounds they make, their helplessness, and breathe. Imagine all that must have happened to that baby that led them to do the hurtful and hateful things as an adult. And breathe. And breathe. I see in the eyes of the baby the goodness inherent in all human beings. I believe that this goodness, however obscured later in life by sickness, psychosis, or suffering, is present under the surface. We may not be able to access it. We don't necessarily going to be able to live long enough to bring out the good in every person. I realize that. That's a humbling realization, but it doesn't have to come by denying the worth of every person. The worth of every person and honoring that is our best, perhaps our only path to a better world. John Lovejoy Elliott, ethical culture leader, said, I believe that the power of seeing the worth and dignity inherent in human beings is the only power that can establish unity on earth. So what am I going to do about it today? Tomorrow? What are you going to do about it today or tomorrow? They can involve your loved ones or strangers. I'm going to conclude with some final words by Eliot. He uses the terms spiritual and religious more loosely than I. I don't mean them supernaturally, and I don't think it is really what's important to him. The common sense that he offers really underlines my extremism. He says, people do not sufficiently believe that there is a spiritual power in the human beings about them. I believe there is, because I have seen it in how they act. We want to lift the weight from the shoulders of everyone and give equal chance to all, because life of all people is sacred. From the sense of sacredness of human life comes all moral and social progress. The test as to whether people are religious has always been whether they believe or not in God. Now I should say there is a deeper test than that, and that is belief in human beings. He adds, I have known many good people who believed in God. I have known many good people who did not believe in God. But I have never known a human being who was good, who did not believe in people. Thank you.